بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وخاتم رسله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله، ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. The topic of Tawhidic Epistemology is the topic of renewal of Islam. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the hadith, he said, إن الله يبعث لهذه الأمة على رأس كل 100 عام من يجدد لها أمر دينها. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends to this ummah every 100 years those who renew its religion, its deen. And this ummah has this feature. This is not the first ummah of Islam. The ummah of Isa was an ummah of Islam. The ummah of Musa was an ummah of Islam. Islam did not come with Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Islam came with Adam. But the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam has a feature of renewal. Of every 100 years or every era, every century, there are a group of people who would like to look into the tajdeed of the ummah. And over the previous century, we had quite a number of projects of tajdeed that I do not see as exclusive or as contradictory, but rather dimensions of the same thing, of the same tajdeed. We have the project of the Islamization of knowledge in several versions, the version of the integration of al-aqli wal-naqli and integration of knowledge and so forth, the social sciences first and then all the sciences, etc. We had the project of al-wasatiyya al-islamiyya, the Islamic central path or moderation, and we have the project of al-sahwa al-islamiyya, the Islamic awakening, al-ihya al-islami, the Islamic revival, the reconstruction of Islamic thought, the Islamic إعادة التركيب وإعادة الصياغة. This is another project, and we had several of the major projects, and the project that I would be talking about, which has to do with the Maqasid as a basis of renewal, which I do not see as different from the Tawhidi project, the Tawhidi Epistemology. The Maqasidi scholars, all of them talked about Tawhid as a Maqsid of the Sharia and a Maqsid of the Aqidah and the Maqsid of Islam. And therefore, they took a Maqasidi line, let's say our Ustad, rahimahullah, Sheikh Taha al-Adwani, but he also talked about Tawheed as the primary Maqsid of Islam. And therefore, the Tawhidi Epistemology, Tawheed al-Ma'rifah wa Tawheed al-Ummah, was part of his discourse. And Madrasa al-Wasatiyya, our other Ustad, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah, yes, talked about Wasatiyya, but he talked about the Tawheed, and he had a number of books. In fact, he has a series on Tawheedullah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the implication on education and science and knowledge from his perspective as an Imam of the Wasatiyya direction. The Islamization of Knowledge project also talked about At-Tawheed from the beginning, from, of course, the book of Sheikh Dr. Ismail Farouqi, At-Tawheed, and, of course, then the work of Dr. Amun Abu al-Fadl and Dr. Abdul Hamid Abu Sliman and all of our Ustads from the Islamization project that talked about Tawheed, all the way to our Ustad, Professor Dr. Osman Bakr, who is now the rector of IIUM. And therefore, I do not see that any of these projects is contributing to other projects, or I do not see the discussion with the lens of the relevance of any of these projects to the other projects, but rather that all of these projects are dimensions of the renewal of the Ummah, very important sides of that renewal. The side that I would like to focus on, that is the topic of my talk that is given to me, is the side of the Maqasid al-Sharia approach, or the project of Maqasid al-Sharia, and what it means for At-Tawheed as a Ma'rifah, the Tawhid Epistemology, or the renewal in the bigger sense of the renewal of this Ummah. I would like to stop at the word Sharia at the beginning and insist that the Sharia is not just law. even though we could call something that in Arabic would be called the tashri'a, or legislation. And therefore, the Maqasid al-Sharia in terms of legislation, or al-Tashri' al-Islami, when we talk about the usual chapters of al-Ibadat and al-Mu'amalat that we know, the Maqasid al-Sharia has a long history of the classification of the different scholars, the most wide and popular of which is the classification of Imam al-Ghazali, and the most fundamentalization or ta'sil of that is the ta'sil of Imam al-Shatibi. And therefore you're talking about الضرورات والحاجيات والتحسينيات وحفظ الدين والنفس والمال والعرض والنسل and so on. And this is not just Maqasid al-Sharia, it is just Maqasid al-Sharia for legislation, for tashri'ah. But if you look at the Sharia in its comprehensive sense, therefore Maqasid al-Sharia would include other disciplines or other abwab, if you wish. We're going to talk the fiqhi language. Maqasid al-Sharia would include Maqasid al-Siyasa, which is a bab or a chapter of fiqh. And therefore, when we look at the objectives of siyasa or politics, political theory, siyasa shar'iyya in Islam, we are actually talking about Maqasid al-Sharia too. And it is not equal to Maqasid al-Sharia of الضرورات والحاجيات والتحسينيات وحفظ الدين والنفس والعقل. It is actually, on top of that, adds a number of other objectives related to a siyasa in Islam. Maqasid al-Iqtisad, if you look at the economic question or the economic discipline in Islam, the Islamic economics, now we call it, they have maqasid too. Ibn Ashur talked about it. Other scholars from the contemporary times, Muhammad Abdu and Rashid Rida, etc., they talked about maqasid al-Iqtisad al-Islami. What are the objectives of the Islamic economics? And yes, Maqasid al-Sharia, Hifz al-Din wa Nafs al-Aql are part of it, but they added a number of other maqasid. They said al-Rawaj, currency of the goods and services and so on. Man'u al-Ihtikar, the prevention of monopoly. They said it's a maqsid of the Sharia when it comes to economics. Man'u al-Dula, the Dula is the monopoly of money between the rich. كي لا يكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم. So they said that منع الدولة is one of those maqasid of al-iqtisad, and therefore they call the maqsid that's called at-tadawul, and so on. And therefore it is Sharia too, but we look at the side of iqtisad, not just أبواب العبادات والمعاملات التقليدية, not just the traditional chapters. And therefore, if you look at Maqasid al-Sharia this way, which is in the title of my input here, you will look at the Sharia in a comprehensive way. And this would be a Tawhidi approach, because a Tawhid is not just about the Tashri', as in the Ibadat and the Mu'amalat in the narrow sense, but a Tawhid, and especially Tawhid al-Ma'rifah, the epistemological Tawhid, is about all aspects of knowledge, all disciplines of knowledge, all sides and views of knowledge that we can think about. And this includes politics and economics, this includes psychology, this includes the Tawheed, the natural sciences would include astronomy, or Prof. Osman Bakr has a book on an Islamic approach to astronomy or space sciences in terms of concepts, etc. This would include medicine, or in other words, this would include the 4 types of disciplines that are prevalent in today's academia, which are the natural sciences, the social sciences, the applied sciences, and the humanities. But wait a minute, this division of disciplines is actually by itself not Tawhidi. The talk about a 21st Islamic university would have to, in my view, go beyond the disciplinization that comes from a secular perspective. Because if you look at Islam in the usual division of humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, and applied sciences, you will see that Islam is going to be very partialistic. It's not going to be the hegemonic view and the epistemological approach, if you wish, you will find that each discipline would have its epistemological borders. And you cannot mix theology, which is Islam, with psychology. You go to a faculty of psychology proper, and you start to talk about prayers or fasting or any of that, and they tell you, no, this is subjective. Now, secular talk. This is going to be not rational, or is going to be contradictory with the positivist approach that a psychological school would take. And therefore, there is resistance from the current disciplinization of knowledge to the idea of Islam being hegemonic over knowledge. And to the best, when they approach Islam in their best ways, they consider Islam to be part of ethics. So let's talk about engineering, and let's consider Islam to be part of ethics of engineering, but not the falsafa, the philosophy, the usul, the fundamental aspects upon which we built engineering. Not the philosophy of design, but the ethics of design. And these are two different aspects. And therefore, when you build a car or a city, when you do architecture or agriculture or any of these branches under engineering, for example, if you're going to go with this classification, you will not going to think about these topics in a Tawhidi way if you divide them with their epistemological borders and consider Islam to be only ethics. We would like in the Tawhidi project to consider Islam to be the fundamental aspect of these sciences. And it doesn't mean that the Quran is a book of engineering or a book of history or a book of psychology or a book of economics. Why? Because these are our limited sciences. These are small. History that we study is very different from what the Quran tells us about history. Psychology that we study is very different from what the Quran could benefit us when we look at it with psychology eyes. So in other words, the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is a bayan or illustration of the Quran, are at the foundation of knowledge, but not in the disciplinary way, not in a way in which we are looking into economic equations in the Quran, or we say where are the architectural designs in the Quran, or where are the linguistic rules or grammar. The Quran doesn't have that, but the Quran guides language studies and guides psychological studies and guides historical studies. Why? Because it comes from Al-Hakim Al-Khabir subhanahu wa ta'ala. It comes from the all-wise and the all-expert subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, when he talks in the Quran, he will give us a fundamental, the definition of the human. Every one of these sciences deal with the human. The definition of our environment, al-mubawwa, the Quran calls it. In Arabic, we call it al-bi'a, but it is mubawwa. That mubawwa that the Quran is talking about is mubawwa sidq and mubawwa rida. And there are certain aspects that we do not describe the environment like that when we do environmental studies. And therefore, what we need the Maqasid for is to define the objectives, the higher objectives, upon which we are able to build new knowledge, to restructure the disciplines that we have. We have in an Islamic university setting a new agenda. We have to set the agenda of restructuring economics, not in the good old capitalist way, but to see what ideas that capitalism could benefit us. And al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. Wisdom is the lost property of the believer, so that perhaps we can borrow some of the ideas. We can build on what humanity has developed. But Islamic economics is not capitalist economics. And Islamic psychology is not Darwinian or Maslowian. And Islamic architecture is not French modernism. And Islamic politics is not based on Westphalia and Machiavelli and Hobbes. And Islamic philosophy is not Aristotelian or all the schools of the Greek or the post-Greek or 17th century and so forth. Why? Because we have different fundamentals. We have a different philosophy. The maqasid of the Sharia in this sense, if we look at the teleological side of Islam, if you look at the purposes and the higher objectives of Islam, then we can start to imagine a different basis of knowledge. A basis that would automatically take us from disciplinary studies to multidisciplinarity, and from multidisciplinarity to transdisciplinarity. And I believe in ISTAC, this is a major part of what we do. I was consulted by a number of scholars over there, whether my colleagues, the professors in the research they do, or our students there. And none of them is really confined to one discipline. None of them told me that, no, this is just economics. I'm not going to bring any other aspect. But they, by definition, because they are taking an Islamic approach, by definition, they find themselves multidisciplinary, and they find themselves even transdisciplinary, looking at disciplines from above and not being confined to the fundamental theories of disciplines, which are mostly based on philosophers who came from a very different approach from the Tawhidi approach. The Tawhidi approach is an Imani approach, is an approach that looks at the universe with the eyes of a believer. And therefore, the believer is not going to define the human as Freud or Maslow defined the human. The believer is not going to define the society as Durkheim defined the society, or Hobbes or Hegel. It doesn't mean that they don't have good ideas. They do. But it means that we borrow from them only what is compatible with our objectives, our maqasid, our higher objectives. The object, obviously, of Tawheed is the highest one. And then under that, you have Al-Imran, civilization. You have At-Taqwa, or heedfulness, awareness. You have the Maqasid of Islah, or rectification, or reform. You have a Maqasid of Istikhlaf, or being, I don't like the vicegerents, but basically succession of humanity to civilization on earth. You have these kinds of maqasid that are under Tawheed that are going to guide us to restructure knowledge. So the essence of what I would like to say in the time allowed is that the projects for the renewal of Islam are not contradictory, and I do view the Maqasid project that I personally am very busy with and write on, etc., as a contributor to a Tajdeed project that is based on the Tawhidic Epistemology. And this contribution is actually in shifting the paradigm to a purpose-based, objective-based paradigm. Paradigm gha'i, or purpose-based, objective-based, ends-based, telos-based, if you want to speak the Greek language, so that the epistemology is actually Quranic. Masdar al-Ma'rifi, to speak Arabic, al-Ma'rifa would be from the Quran, the Book of Allah, the concepts, the objectives, the parties, the different aspects of values, etc., so that we can rebuild our knowledge and so that we can contribute to a better world. Finally, I would like to say that this renewal from the Islamic point of view is much needed in today's time, given the massacres that are happening, given the failure of international systems, not just the political systems. The economic systems are failing us. The media systems are failing us and failing the truth and failing humanity. And what's happening in Palestine is a very obvious example of the failure of these hegemonic systems. And the Islamic projects for renewal are all very important for humanity to see a different kind of light for its life, for humanity to look at life in a more humane way. That is what Islam would contribute, let alone in a Tawheedi way that knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and works for pleasing Him subhanahu wa ta'ala with everything that is good.